we're just getting the YouTube live stream set up right now.
Sounds good. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Perfect.
Yeah, sorry, just a few more minutes. I think we're just waiting to make an announcement, and then after we make the announcement, we'll have the YouTube set up.
No problem.
All right, looks like our YouTube live stream is set up and the announcement is made. So hi everyone and welcome to Kevin McKenzie from NJCCIC's Tech Talk, Endpoint Detection and Response, the next generation of host protection. So Kevin McKenzie is a cybersecurity analyst at NJCCIC, and not only that, and he's also a recent graduate from NJIT, graduating from 2018. Thank you so much, Kevin McKenzie, for your time, and we're really looking forward to your talk.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction. I'll just tell you a little bit more about myself. So I started the NJCCIC in 2017 as an intern and returned as a full-time employee in 2018 after I graduated. While interning, I worked on the vulnerability management team, and I'm currently now working on the cloud infrastructure and security team. I also do some automation as well as manage our EDR platform, which is what we're going to be talking a little bit more about today. All right. So we'll go ahead and jump in. So what is endpoint detection and response? So endpoint detection and response, or EDR, is a security solution that continuously monitors hosts for malicious activity and can respond to malware, and is also it's generally facilitated by an installed agent. Some of the key elements of EDR solutions include continuous endpoint monitoring from anywhere if you're using a cloud-based solution. So as long as that host has an internet connection, you can monitor and protect that host. They typically support creating security alerts to notify a security operations center or SOC, as well as other staff if relevant. They support automated remediation where malicious activity can be detected and blocked. And they also support automated or manual response where workflows can be triggered on specific criteria, or SOC analysts or other security staff can choose to take additional actions if required. They typically also support threat hunting where analysts can proactively search for potential security issues and security threats. All right, so when I talk about endpoint detection and response, I like to split it into two parts, the endpoint detection part and then the response part, and we'll talk about each of these parts separately. So endpoint detection, the way it's different from your traditional AV solution is that endpoint detection is going to look at behavior versus, static files and, completing static analysis. So what do I mean by this? I like to give an example using PowerShell. So the PowerShell executable, this is a Microsoft executable. It's built into pretty much every version of Windows or modern version of Windows. Um, and this executable is a known good executable, right? However, we've seen plenty of attacks that leverage PowerShell scripts, and now this known good executable starts doing something bad, right? So if you were to run a traditional AV against the PowerShell executable, it would come back as clean, it's known. However, the executable, if leveraged by an adversary, can exhibit malicious behavior. So endpoint detection solutions will look at file behavior or executable behavior and ignore everything else about that executable. So it doesn't really care about its previous reputation. It cares only about its current behavior at any particular time. So because of this behavior based analysis, EDR solutions can detect and block ransomware. So for example, if a malicious file or malicious process or executable is exhibiting behaviors related to ransomware, including, let's say, shadow copy, backup deletion, rapid file name changes where files are getting encrypted, this activity would be detected and prevented. Um, Endpoint detection solutions can also stop malware execution, suspicious user or process behavior, and can target fileless attacks, including malicious JavaScript, embedded VBA scripts and documents as examples. In addition to those capabilities, they can also do hash-based detection, right? So this would be more along the static side of file analysis, where if a known bad executable matches a certain file hash, then the agent can take action based on that as well. So you kind of get the best of both worlds with EDR. All right. And we have an example here that we actually observed in our environment. So I put this screenshot here, and I know that it probably doesn't mean anything to you if you just look at it, especially if you're seeing anything like this for the first time. So the point of this is a very heavily obfuscated script, and static-based analysis would likely not catch this. What we've observed is scripts like this, they have very small changes. So you'll see many of these with small changes all the time. And these changes are enough to evade static analysis. Again, because endpoint detection solutions don't care about files reputation, they care about behavior. This obfuscation doesn't really matter. Eventually, once this script turns into this other slide that we're looking at here, which you see some deobfuscated PowerShell, once that malicious behavior is observed, that's when the solution will start to detect and prevent that activity. And I'll just give a quick explanation of what this PowerShell is doing. So this there's a couple URLs defined here at the top. There's a couple objects here that help set up the script for HTTP communication to stream binary data across the internet. There's an inclusion of multiple URLs, which allows the script to loop through them to pick one that works, right? So once the script hits a URL that works, it will go ahead and download, whatever malicious binaries it can from there. And this is likely in an attempt to add redundancy to the script. So, if one URL gets blocked, the second or the third one potentially wouldn't be blocked and would still be hosting that malicious binary. Once that binary data is downloaded, it's then saved to an executable, which is then launched to set up the second stage of an attack. So once an attack happens, let's talk about the response part. So one way of responding is to do host isolation, which blocks all incoming and outgoing network communications to an endpoint, to and from an endpoint, while still allowing the agent on that endpoint to communicate with the EDR platform. So there's no disruption in monitoring or alerts, and in fact, the host can still generate logs, whilst SOC analysts can still maintain the ability to take actions on the device. So an analyst can still connect to a device and run some response actions. We can also gather data. So we can connect to a host. Again, it doesn't really matter where the host is as long as it's internet connected. And we can collect system logs, Windows event logs, web server or application logs, etc. We can collect running processes and network connection information. And this is very important because we can collect live data from the host, which might otherwise be lost if a device needed to be physically removed from the network or powered off potentially. We can also complete remediation actions, including removing or collecting files for further analysis, killing processes, deploying additional tools for remediation, meaning scanning tools or other tools, and also potentially even going as far as installing emergency patches on systems if required. So let's walk through an automated response example. So we have an example of an automated response where an executable related to ransomware attempts to execute on system. Your EDR solution might be able to isolate the host, kill the process that exhibited ransomware-like behavior, and potentially kill parent and child processes as well. Quarantine the offending executables, submit them to a sandbox for analysis, and then delete scheduled tasks, reverse registry operations, which may be used to maintain persistence on a host if left in place. So those are things that could be accomplished automatically. A SOC analyst would not have to step in to complete these tasks. However, your team or an analyst might want to take additional steps to complete the response workflow. So they may be able to remove remnants of the attack, including malicious documents, compress archives, temporary files, etc. Collect event and application logs that might not have been collected automatically, as well as review telemetry data to establish an attack timeline. So when you want to create a report, you get as much details as you can to make that report complete. EDR platforms also support threat hunting. So you can search across all the logs collected by all your agents. You can do broad searches for indicators. So you can use regular expressions, pattern matching, partial searches in order to find threats or potential threats in your environment. You can also do more granular queries where you can search for particular IP addresses or domains, file hashes, even even certain command line strings. And we have another example here of how we used EDR in our environment. So when the Log4j vulnerabilities were discovered and announced, we were able to perform threat hunting to identify potentially vulnerable versions of the application. So we had a centralized place to search for indicators, including IP addresses, file activity, including jar files written and executed on systems, process execution, as well as affected applications. And here's a little code snippet here at the bottom of the screen. I've kind of anonymized the data a little bit, but this is an example of what you would be able to see from one of these platforms. All right. Now, there's additional benefits to EDR platforms, including continuous log collection from hosts, host inventory, application inventory, account monitoring, vulnerability assessment, as well as third-party integrations. In terms of log collection, so we mentioned previously that agents continuously collect logs, including DNS requests, network connections from a system, file system events, including file reads, writes, renames, etc. System configuration changes, example, secure kernel, which protects parts of memory by marking them as read-only, drive encryption status, as well as secure boot status. We can also potentially track user account activity and status. So log on and log off times, brute force attempts against an account, password age, etc. So all of these are additional benefits, right? So we're already collecting a lot of logs from these systems. We can use them in other ways outside of, kind of the primary functions of EDR, which would be, of course, malware detection and prevention. We can also maintain a host inventory, right? Or use the host inventory from these platforms to augment other systems. So we can track detailed information about hosts in one place, including system properties, operating system version, hardware details, etc. The host status, meaning the last time it was seen, or the last time it connected to the internet, whether it's online or offline, and potentially even its location based on its IP address, as well as vulnerabilities. And I wanted to give an example here of how we've used this host information to help increase the security of the state. So the end of life for Windows Server 2012 is coming up in a year, and we've already started to migrate systems off of these operating systems. And using our EDR solution, we're able to track this progress. So we're able to identify the hosts that need to be targeted, as well as track these hosts as they're being decommissioned over time. So I'll take one pause here and say that these might seem more like IT related things, right? Host inventory. However, we can clearly see that they also have benefits when as it relates to cybersecurity. We can also do application inventory as well. So we can get a detailed view of installed applications and versions, application usage. So we can check by hash, for example, or by date. And the benefits here include tracking compliance to make sure that users are using the right versions of applications, identifying unwanted application usage, right? So if users are able to download executables and run them, we can identify that activity. And then also along the IT lines, software licensing, just being able to count how many instances of a particular application you're using can be extremely important. We have another example here of how we've used application inventories to help secure the state. So when the KC supply chain attack was announced, we essentially were able to do a search across the entire enterprise to understand where we were using any KC applications. We were able to very quickly notify the affected organizations, and we were also able to isolate machines where required to help prevent a potential attack. So we were actually able to completely mitigate the attack by leveraging all of the tools available in the EDR platform that we use. Then there's also third-party integrations. So we use a lot of different tools, and having those tools integrate with each other is extremely helpful and useful. So being able to export data from this EDR platform to any other platform for whatever reason, it could be, for example, to a SIM or to long-term storage for compliance reasons, and being able to integrate with various APIs. So let's say, for example, for security orchestration, automation, and response platforms, when you want to do additional automation, as well as for an alert enrichment, where we can add context to the detections or the alerts that we see inside that platform. You can also run custom scripts, right? So I have a bunch of custom scripts that I run to do various things, including, let's say, user account auditing. driving encryption status auditing, monitoring end-of-life systems to make sure that they're being properly decommissioned, even just collecting users in the platform. Tell me how many users are using the platform. So having API integrations is extremely helpful, as well as having vendor-supported integrations as well. I'm going to open up for questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kevin McKenzie, for your talk. At this time, if anyone else has any members of the audience has questions, feel free to put them in chat or in the Discord. One question I do have is that in your case studies, you mentioned some very recent and current vulnerabilities, such as the Log4j and the Kenzie attack. So I was wondering, how do you stay up to date on all of these current attacks, and how does that affect your work-life balance?
Good question. So I do a lot of reading. So I have websites that I just visit, daily, and um, I'll read new articles. We also have internal chats where people might post interesting articles as well. So I'll follow those links. Um, how does it affect my personal life? Well, I'm very interested in cybersecurity, so in some ways it's a little bit of a hobby, so it doesn't really affect me in that way. I really enjoy um, doing cybersecurity and being involved in learning more.
Thank you. The next question is, how do you, as a outside of your professional life, how do you make sure that you stay secure, especially with the increasing amounts of attacks?
Good question. Multi-factor wherever it's supported. I also use hardware keys. The vendor doesn't matter. So I use hardware keys for the services that support it. So if I had to give one piece of advice, I would say implement multi-factor as soon as possible wherever it's supported. And if you want to go further, use hardware keys as well.
What exactly do you mean by hardware keys?
So essentially a hardware key is a method of two-factor authentication that requires an actual USB device that needs to be plugged into your computer to prove that you're the person attempting to authenticate to an account. So instead of getting a text message code or potentially a code from a TOTP app, you set up a hardware key and link it to your account. Anytime you try to authenticate to an account, you have to have that key plugged into the computer, and you usually also have to touch, a certain part of the key in order to confirm that, you're actually using that key.
I can definitely see how adding that physical component would lead to more security. The next question from John the Ripoff, who actually asked a question at our previous talk too, is, would it be possible for someone to go directly into an incident response role from the university, or would they start at a SOC?
So I would say it is possible. It just depends on the organization and their structure. So, but I will say this: typically, you will start out kind of as a SOC team member, and then as you learn, you kind of elevate into that response role.
Question is from Mehul Vagani. Are there any good recommendations for home lab EDR agents? We can't really afford to get MDATP or Falcon at home.
Yes, so I'm aware of Elastic, which I believe is free. So I think you can run Elastic at home, as long as the numbers of hosts that you're deploying to is relatively small. So that's the only one that I'm aware of that's free.
Are there any drawbacks of using a free one versus a non-free one?
Yeah, so typically free solutions will have some features locked away. However, it should still give you a pretty good idea of how the solution works overall, and especially for learning purposes. Um, it will definitely be useful for learning purposes as well as even putting on your resume, depending on the level of experience that you have.
Makes sense. I guess, do you have any other advice for people looking to get into cybersecurity, especially if they come from a computer science background but don't necessarily have any security specific experiences?
Sure. So I think one piece of maybe just general advice I would offer, so not specifically to computer science students, is just understand coding, right? So even if you are unable to write code, being able to read and understand code is extremely helpful. It's not only helpful in analyzing, for example, the obfuscated code that I shared earlier, and being able to reverse engineer it. It's also just helpful in understanding um, other logs, other text-based files that you might see that might have similar structure. So I would say learning code on a basic level, or even scripting slash code is extremely helpful.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. It really means a lot to have you here, especially as an alumni currently working in the industry. So, to our viewers, about like 45 of you are currently watching. The flag is currently being shown on the screen. Be sure to screenshot and make sure you have it visible. Thank you.
Thank you.